He didn't raise his voice. That's what made it worse. He smiled like this was reasonable and told me I wasn't welcome anymore. No explanation, no discussion, just a door quietly closed in my face. I said okay and left. That's the part they misunderstood, because that night, while they were celebrating their upcoming trip, I was fixing a problem. One login, a few clicks, no messages sent, no warnings given. By morning, everything they planned for months was already falling apart, and they still had no idea it was me. My name is Felicia. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here we are. A few weeks ago, my brother sat across from me at the kitchen table like this was a business meeting. Calm voice, neutral face. He told me I wasn't welcome anymore. Not at the house, not on the trip they'd been planning, just not included. No argument, no chance to explain myself. I remember nodding, grabbing my keys, and walking out like it didn't hurt. But it did. What hurt most was how final it sounded, like I was already written out of the family story and everyone else had agreed. I spent that night replaying the moment over and over, wondering how things got there. And while I was doing that, something else clicked. I realized I still had access, still had information, still had leverage they forgot about. Before I go any further, if you've ever been pushed out quietly by someone who thought you wouldn't notice, hit subscribe. You're going to want to hear how this unfolds. This was just the beginning. I drove for a long time that night. No destination, just streets I knew by heart, passing places that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every red light gave me another second to think about how easily I'd been dismissed. Not shouted down, not fought with, simply removed. That kind of rejection sits heavier because there's nothing loud to push back against. Just silence. I kept thinking about how often I'd shown up for him, babysitting when he needed help, covering for him when things went wrong, being the flexible one because that's what family does. None of that came up at the table, none of it mattered. In his version of the story, I was an inconvenience that could be managed with a calm sentence and a polite tone. When I finally parked, I didn't go inside right away. I sat there and realized something important. People like that assume quiet means weak. They assume leaving without a fight means you've accepted their decision. They confuse self-control with surrender. That misunderstanding is dangerous. I didn't feel angry in the way movies show it. No shaking hands, no rage. It was colder than that, clearer. I started replaying recent conversations, small details I hadn't paid attention to before, dates, emails, plans discussed casually, assuming I was still part of the inner circle. They'd already moved on, but they hadn't closed every door. By the time I went inside, I wasn't upset anymore. I was focused. I made tea I didn't drink, sat at the table, opened my laptop without any dramatic thought process. Not to act yet. Just to look, to understand what I still knew, what I still had access to, what they assumed I'd never use. It wasn't about hurting anyone. It was about balance, about consequences matching confidence. If you've ever had someone underestimate you because you stayed calm, make sure you're subscribed. This story is about what happens next. I stayed up later than I should have, not doing anything obvious. No frantic typing, no late-night messages, just reading, noting patterns, watching how easily people leave trails when they believe no one is paying attention. The house was quiet. My phone buzzed once with a group chat notification I didn't open. I already knew what it would say. Excitement, jokes, travel countdown energy, life moving on without me. That's when it really settled in. This wasn't an emotional decision on his part. It was logistical. Cleaner for him if I wasn't there. Less complicated. And the truth is, that clarity helped me more than it hurt. Because when someone reduces you to a problem to be managed, they forget you're also a variable. I closed the laptop and went to bed without doing a thing. That part matters. Nothing rushed ever ends well. I needed sleep. I needed distance. I needed to let the calm harden into something steady. The kind of calm that doesn't leak. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight and a strange sense of control. Not power, control. There's a difference. Power is loud, control is quiet and patient. I went through my normal routine: shower, coffee, emails for work. Anyone watching would have thought I'd moved on already, but I hadn't forgotten a single detail. Later that day, I crossed paths with my brother briefly. Small talk only, weather, timing, nothing about the night before. He seemed relieved, like the situation had resolved itself neatly. That told me everything I needed to know. Before we move on, take a second and subscribe if you haven't already. This story doesn't explode all at once, it unravels, and we're just getting to the part where the threads start to pull. By the third day, the excitement around their trip had turned into background noise. That's when people get careless, plans feel locked in, nothing left to double check. That false sense of security is powerful and expensive. I remembered how I'd helped organize parts of this trip months earlier. Not because I was invited, because I was useful. I knew where confirmations were stored, which emails mattered, which ones everyone ignored. I also knew how often my brother reused passwords. Habits don't change just because relationships do. I didn't rush. I waited for the right moment, the quiet window when no one would be actively looking. Late evening, after dinner. Phones down. That's when I logged in. No panic, no second guessing, just methodical clicks. One small adjustment at a time, nothing dramatic enough to trigger an alert. Just enough to shift timing, routes, dependencies. The kind of changes that don't show up until it's too late to fix them. I paused more than once. Not because I felt guilty, because precision matters. Revenge isn't about chaos. It's about letting people walk confidently into consequences they helped create. When I was done, I logged out and closed the laptop like I'd finished checking the weather. No messages sent, no proof left behind. Just silence. The next day, the group chat lit up again. Confusion this time. Questions without answers. Someone blamed the airline. Someone blamed the hotel. My brother tried to sound in control, but the tone had shifted. Shorter replies. Defensive jokes, stress bleeding through the screen. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. If you're still watching, make sure you're subscribed, because from here on out, things don't break all at once. They fail in layers. And that's where the real story begins. The first real crack showed up the night before they were supposed to leave. A late message came through asking if anyone else was having trouble checking in. I watched the typing bubbles appear and disappear like nervous ticks. Everyone assumed it was a glitch, temporary, fixable in the morning. That assumption did a lot of the work for me. Morning came fast. I woke up early without an alarm, not excited, just alert. I made coffee and sat by the window while my phone stayed face down on the table. When I finally picked it up, the calm was gone. Messages stacked on messages. Screenshots, frustration creeping into every sentence. Someone couldn't access their reservation. Someone else had been reassigned. A layover didn't exist anymore. Each problem small on its own. Together, a mess. What fascinated me wasn't the problems. It was how quickly people turned on each other. Stress reveals fault lines. One person accused another of missing an email. Someone snapped back. My brother tried to pull rank, but authority doesn't mean much when no one knows what's actually wrong. Control is an illusion until it's tested. I stayed invisible, not lurking, just absent. Silence is powerful when everyone expects reassurance. The longer I didn't respond, the louder the confusion became. Calls replaced texts, panic replaced jokes. By the time they reached customer service, options were already narrowing, fees, delays. Rebooking windows closing one by one. That's when it stopped being theoretical. This wasn't a minor inconvenience anymore. This was missed connections, lost money, tight smiles at an airport gate while pretending everything was fine. I went about my day like normal, meetings, errands, lunch. Every so often, I'd glance at my phone and see another update unraveling. Each one confirmed the same thing. They still had no idea how this started, and they never thought to look in my direction. Before we move on, subscribe if you haven't. Segment 3 is where the consequences finally land and the story stops being quiet. The airport was where it all finally caught up with them. I didn't see it in person. I saw it in fragments. Voice notes sent too fast, half sentences. A photo of a departure board that didn't match what anyone expected. That's when denial runs out. When you're standing under fluorescent lights with bags at your feet and nowhere to go, excuses stop working. My brother called me for the first time since that night at the table. I let it ring. Not to be dramatic. I was in the middle of something. I finished what I was doing, washed my hands, then listened to the voicemail. His voice was tight, controlled, trying hard to sound normal. He asked if I'd ever seen anything like this before, if I had any ideas. Like muscle memory kicked in and he reached for the person who usually fixed things. I didn't call back. What surprised me was how fast the group fractured once it was clear this couldn't be solved quickly. Some people wanted to push through, others wanted to cancel everything. Someone started talking about money, who owed what. Who should have double-checked? Stress stripped away politeness. Old resentment slipped out in public. They spent hours in lines that barely moved. Every solution came with a cost. Extra nights, different cities, seats split up. The kind of compromises that turn a getaway into an endurance test. And the whole time, my brother kept trying to manage it, to pull everyone back together, like control was something he could just reassert if he stayed calm enough. That calm didn't work on me. It didn't work on the situation either. Later that evening, he finally texted. Not about the trip, about us. He said we needed to talk when things settled down. The timing told me everything. I wasn't excluded anymore. I was useful again. I set the phone down and didn't reply. If you're still here, stay with me, because in the next part, the truth starts pressing in, and decisions get made that can't be undone. They ended up scattered across the terminal like strangers who arrived together by accident. Some sat on the floor near outlets. Others paced with phones pressed to their ears, repeating the same explanations to different agents, hoping one of them would magically fix everything. Hope does that. It makes people believe the next person will be more helpful than the last. My brother kept bouncing between them, trying to stay composed, trying to be the calm center. But calm without answers just looks empty. Every time someone asked him what the plan was, he gave a version of "we're figuring it out." After the third hour, that stopped working. Another voicemail came in, longer this time, less controlled. He said things were complicated. He said money was involved now. He said people were upset and he didn't know what to tell them. There was a pause near the end, like he was deciding whether to say the next part. Then he said he wished I was there. That part almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, because it was predictable. The same calm voice that had shut me out was now searching for support. Same tone, different need. He still hadn't apologized, still hadn't acknowledged what he'd done. He just wanted stability back. Someone to absorb the mess. I didn't respond. As the hours dragged on, the group chat shifted from logistics to blame. Someone brought up how rushed the planning had felt. Someone else mentioned that certain details were last minute. A name almost came up once, mine. But it stopped short, like the idea felt inconvenient. Easier to blame systems than people. Easier to blame bad luck than decisions. By the time they finally settled on a downgraded version of the trip, the mood had changed completely. This wasn't a vacation anymore. It was damage control, shortened stays, split accommodations. Everyone calculating what they'd lost and quietly resenting whoever they decided was responsible. That night, my brother sent one last message. No excuses, no requests. Just a short line saying he hoped we could talk when he got back. I read it once and put my phone away, because by then the point had already been made. Not loudly, not publicly, but clearly. Calm decisions have consequences too, and sometimes silence does more than any argument ever could. They were gone for days, but it didn't feel like distance. It felt like suspension, like everything was paused, waiting to land somewhere awkward and unavoidable. I followed none of it directly. No stalking flights, no refreshing messages, just the occasional notification that slipped through when someone reacted too late or sent something to the wrong thread. Little signals, enough to know the tension never really eased. What did change was the tone. Early on, people were still trying to salvage moments, photos forced into smiles, captions pretending this was all part of the adventure. But as the days went on, those stopped. No updates, no jokes. Silence again, but a different kind. Heavier. This kind comes from exhaustion, not confidence. I used that time to think about what I actually wanted. That mattered more than what I'd already done. It's easy to act when emotions are fresh, harder to sit with the results and decide what they mean. I wasn't angry anymore. That had burned off quickly. What remained was clarity, about patterns, about how easily people rewrite history when it suits them. I replayed that kitchen conversation in my head, not with resentment, but curiosity. How practiced it had sounded, how relieved he'd looked when I didn't push back. That told me this decision hadn't been sudden. It had been rehearsed internally long before it was spoken out loud. I was just the last to be informed. When they finally came back, the energy shifted again. Not dramatic, subtle. The kind of change you feel in pauses and half sentences. My brother reached out 2 days after returning, asked if I was free to talk, neutral wording, no pressure. I agreed. We met in a public place, his choice. He looked tired, not just physically. The kind of tired that comes from being exposed to situations you can't fully control. He talked first about the trip, about how stressful it had been, about how things went wrong in ways no one could have predicted. That phrasing stood out. No one could have predicted. Passive, convenient. Then he circled back to us. He said he handled things poorly, that he was under a lot of pressure, that he thought space would make things easier. Easier for who, he didn't say. He didn't ask how I felt. He assumed. Assumptions were clearly his weak spot. I listened without interrupting, not because I was being polite, because silence still worked. He filled it quickly. Apologies layered with explanations, explanations dressed up as accountability. He wanted closure. He wanted reassurance. He wanted the version of me that made his life simpler. What he didn't realize was that something had shifted permanently. I told him I accepted his apology. That part was true. Holding on to it would have tied me to the moment longer than I wanted. But acceptance isn't the same as restoration. Trust doesn't bounce back just because someone acknowledges a mistake. It rebuilds slowly, if at all. He seemed relieved, mistook my calm for resolution. We talked a little longer, then left. No hug, no promises, just an understanding that things were different now, even if he couldn't fully see how. That was the real consequence, not the trip, not the stress, not the money. It was the realization that I wouldn't automatically step back into the role he'd assigned me before, that the quiet person he dismissed had boundaries now, memory, control over her own involvement. If you're still watching, stay with me. Because the final segment isn't about what I did to him, it's about what I stopped doing for everyone else. After that conversation, I expected some kind of follow-up, a text, a call, something that signaled he understood what had changed. Instead, there was nothing. Days passed, then a week. Silence again. Not the tense kind this time, the comfortable kind people slip into when they think an issue has been handled. That told me more than anything he'd said. In his mind, the apology closed the loop. We had talked, he'd acknowledged stress, I'd accepted it, end of story. He didn't see the missing piece because he never had. The part where I decide what access looks like going forward, The part where I'm not automatically available just because I always was before. Other people noticed the shift before he did. Small things at first, fewer check-ins, fewer requests disguised as favors. I stopped volunteering information, stopped filling gaps, stopped smoothing over awkward moments that weren't mine to fix. When plans were discussed around me, I listened instead of organizing. When problems came up, I let them sit. It was uncomfortable, not for me, for them. People are used to certain roles being stable. When someone quietly steps out of theirs, it creates friction, confusion, a sense that something is off but no one wants to name it. I could feel that tension in conversations. The pauses where someone expected me to jump in, the glances when I didn't. My brother felt it eventually too. He started reaching out more, casual messages, checking in, asking how things were going. Nothing wrong with that on its own. But it all carried the same assumption, that access would slowly reset. That time would smooth things back into place without any real adjustment on his part. I didn't shut him out. I just responded honestly, briefly, on my schedule. I didn't over-explain. I didn't perform warmth to make him comfortable. And I didn't reopen doors just because he knocked softly. What surprised me was how freeing that felt. I hadn't realized how much energy I spent managing other people's comfort until I stopped doing it. How often I adjusted myself to avoid friction. How quickly I stepped in to stabilize situations that benefited everyone but me. That night at the kitchen table had been a cut. This was the healing, slower, quieter, more permanent. The trip stopped coming up in conversation, not because it was resolved, but because no one wanted to linger on it. It had become one of those shared experiences people agree not to dissect too closely, too messy, too revealing, easier to move on. I had already moved on, not in anger, not in triumph, just with clarity. I knew now how quickly inclusion could be revoked, how calmly people could make decisions that reshape your place in their lives. And once you see that, you don't unsee it. That's what made this different from every conflict before. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had perspective. And that changes behavior in ways no dramatic confrontation ever could. One segment left. And it's not about him at all. Here's the part people always expect to be louder than it is. Nothing blew up after that. No final confrontation. No confession. No moment where everything was laid out and everyone suddenly understood my side. Life doesn't work that way. What happened instead was quieter and, honestly, more unsettling. Time passed, holidays came around, group plans formed again. This time, no one assumed I'd handle them. No one handed me responsibility without asking. When decisions were made, I was informed, not relied on. That change told me everything. People hadn't just noticed my absence, they had adjusted to it. My brother and I still talk. On the surface, things look fine, polite, stable, but something fundamental never came back. He's more careful now, not kinder, careful. Like someone who touched a hot stove once and learned where not to place their hand again. And here's the part that might surprise you. I don't regret what I did. Not because it hurt him, not because it disrupted a trip, but because it forced a truth into the open that would have stayed buried forever otherwise. That night at the table showed me how easily I could be removed. What followed showed him I wasn't as invisible as he thought. We never talked about the details. He never asked how things went wrong, and I never offered explanations. Some questions aren't asked because people already know the answer would change how they see someone, or themselves. What I did wasn't about revenge in the way people usually mean it. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel, it didn't leave fingerprints, it simply matched the energy I was given. Calm, decisive, final. And the truth is, the biggest shift wasn't in him. It was in me. I no longer assume permanence where there isn't any. I no longer mistake access for loyalty. And I don't fight to stay where I'm quietly pushed out. I leave or I stay. But now it's always my choice. So here's what I want to know from you. Was I wrong for staying silent and letting the consequences play out? Or was that silence the first boundary I ever set? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you land on this one. Before you go, subscribe to the channel. Stories like this aren't about shock value or loud drama. They're about the quiet moments people recognize themselves in. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or forced to rethink where you stand, you'll find more of that here. Subscribe, stay with the channel, and join the conversation. The comment section is where these stories really continue.